Hello. Thanks for joining me for this short module on using found poems to teach a variety of ELA and ELD Common Core State Standards. I'm Leslie Zaroya, Reading Language Arts Coordinator at LA County Office of Education. So you may be wondering, what the heck is a found poem? A found poem is one that is created by taking phrases from an existing text and reorganizing those phrases into a poem. You can use fiction or nonfiction texts. I've used both, and both work well as long as there is some descriptive language to pull from. So let's look at an example. So here's a very famous passage by Sandra Cisneros called Salvador, Late or Early. Salvador with eyes the color of a caterpillar, Salvador of the crooked hair and crooked teeth, Salvador whose name the teacher cannot remember, is a boy who is no one's friend, runs along somewhere in that vague direction where homes are the color of bad weather, lives behind a raw wood doorway, shakes the sleepy brothers awake, ties their shoes, combs their hair with water, feeds them milk and cornflakes from a tin cup in the dim dark of the morning. Salvador inside that wrinkled shirt, inside the throat that must clear itself and apologize each time it speaks, inside that 40-pound body of boy with its geography of scars, its history of hurt, limbs stuffed with feathers and rags, in what part of the eyes, in what part of the heart, in that cage of the chest where something throbs with both fists and knows only what Salvador knows. Inside that body too small to contain the 100 balloons of happiness, the single guitar of grief, is a boy like any other, disappearing out the door beside the schoolyard gate, where he is told his brothers they must wait. So here you can see that this passage is very descriptive, and I selected words and phrases that I wanted to form into a poem. You can use the phrases in order or rearrange them. Here I rearrange them to suit my particular focus. My poem reads, Salvador, a boy, runs, lives, shakes, combs, feeds his brothers, a geography of scars, 100 balloons, a boy, like any other, disappearing in the dim dark. So what skills did it require of me to do this work? I had to read closely and look for language that conveyed what I wanted. In this case, Salvador, the brother, and what he does. I used a lot of verbs. I had to rearrange the lines so that it looked like a poem and had emphasis on certain words. I was aware of the tone of the words and what meaning it might convey about Salvador. Also, it gave me a non-threatening way of writing a poem. I didn't have to start with a blank page. This is really important. Kids can be afraid of poetry and think it is frivolous or even scary to write. But found poems take that away and focus in on the tone and message of the author's words. So let's take this to another level. Instead of just having students choose any phrases and arrange them, you can assign a focus. For example, have students decide whether Salvador was happy or sad and prove that through the phrases they select from the text and how they rearrange them into a poem. Here's my example. So I took the stance that Salvador is sad. The phrases I chose are highlighted in red. Then I put them into a poem, and I actually did that in order of their appearance in the text. I could totally rearrange them. It's whatever makes sense to you at the time. So mine says, Salvador, crooked hair, crooked teeth, no one's friend, wrinkled shirt, geography of scars, limbs stuffed, cage of the chest, singular guitar of grief. Next, I would have students write a reflection on which side they took and how their poem reflects that stance. It would be something like, my poem reflects Salvador's sadness. He has crooked hair and teeth, so he looks funny. He doesn't have friends. No one seems to look after him as his shirt is wrinkled and his hair messy. He's got scars, and his chest, where his heart is caged or closed. The last line seals it and maybe explains more of his sadness, which is grief. The tone of my poem is sad, and I arranged the lines to reflect his crooked life. So what skills did that require? Again, I had to read closely and look for language and evidence that would support my stance that Salvador was sad. I looked at tone and word choice and searched for figurative language that would work well in the poem. I also had to discern if it makes sense in the flow of a poem and give the tone I was going for. I had to do some reflective work and look at why I chose each phrase and decided to organize it that way. So while it seems rather simple, there are actually a lot of complex skills going on. Reading for literature standards 1, 2, and 4 could easily come into play depending on the prompt that you give and the follow-up reflection students do. The language standards 3 and 5 deal with how language functions and understanding figurative language. We'd be hitting some of standard 3 in the writing domain and using descriptive detail, and of course speaking and listening skills in the sharing part of the lesson, which you will see in a minute. Add to that the ELD standards in part 1, standards 6, 7, and 10, and even in part 2, standards 1 and 5. It's really a lot of skills, but in a fun and non-threatening way. Here are some examples from a recent book study I'm leading on a nonfiction text. We are reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is amazing, by the way. It's more of an adult book, so I would read it with high school students only. In chapter 5, he used a lot of language that really conveyed the harm against what he calls the black body. They were able to choose any lines in the chapter to form their poem. It was so interesting to see the reoccurring themes and powerful lines. So it really can work for both fiction and nonfiction, and can really be such a powerful way to digest a text. Let's quickly recap. Step 1 is to choose a text that makes sense and has some great figurative language. Then you can either give it free rein to choose lines, which is probably a good idea the first time students do a found poem. But then to get a bit more out of it, choose a focus and have students take a stance and find lines that prove their position. Next, students find lines in the text that support their position and highlight them or write them down. Then the lines are organized into a poem. Here's the same poem 2 different ways. This is fun for kids because the emphasis can really change depending on how the lines are structured. One fun thing to do is to put each line on a strip of paper and let them physically move the lines around to play with what works best and to play with how it looks on the page. This really gets at the ELD standards of how language works. It shows students the power of certain phrases and how emphasis can be placed just by the structure of the lines. Here's the next step, reflection. Students write a paragraph on how their poem proves the position they took. They can talk about their word choices, the tone, the structure, what imagery it provokes. This step is really important because it is demonstrating that they truly understand these standards and can apply them. The last step, which we haven't yet looked at, is to share poems. Put students in pairs or small groups and have them analyze each other's work for commonalities and differences. How did selecting different phrases change the tone, imagery, or position the writer took? This is where students can have a robust academic discussion and see concrete examples of how language works, which is great for all kids and especially English learners. Here's a few other texts that work well. Of course, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. Also, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I also love The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And then nonfiction speeches from Kennedy or Martin Luther King or Obama or Steve Jobs all have great descriptive language. And also other long poems. Casey at the Bat in 5th grade and The Raven in 9th grade. The point is just to find something that has descriptive language that conveys meaning so that there's enough content to choose from. Thanks so much for joining me for this short module. Let us know if we can do anything to support you. Take care.